I remember the first time I heard his voice, not through vox nor echo, but inside the hollow chamber of my thoughts. It was the voice of confession, calm and low, the kind that makes you believe you've already been forgiven, even as the knife turns beneath your ribs. They said he wore the mask of an imperial priest, a servant of the Emperor's mercy. But mercy has no place in the hive of Varnak Primus, not when faith itself has rotted into theater. I came here to silence a heretic. What I found was an entire cathedral built upon lies that prayed louder than truth. The smell of incense never leaves you in places like this. It seeps into the skin, into the folds of your thoughts until even your memories reek of sanctity. I've walked battlefields where demons screamed the Emperor's name backward, and I have watched psychers burn until their bones sang. None of that prepared me for the quiet beneath the choir loft or the eyes that waited for me there. Eyes that already knew my sins. If you have walked in the dark long enough to recognize yourself in it, if you've ever wondered what faith costs when it's stripped to the bone, stay with me. You will want to see how this ends. If my words reach you across the static, across the distance between light and shadow, then lend your belief, like, share, and subscribe, not for me, but for the Emperor. Every witness is a weapon against the heretic, and I will need every weapon I can find. They told me the hive's breath changed when you crossed into the cathedral precinct, that the air itself learned to kneel. I felt it as soon as the lift cage released me onto the pilgrim level. The heat softened into a devotional hush, the tang of solvent surrendered to incense, and the usual scab of chemsmog thinned to a pale saffron veil. I kept my rosette hidden beneath the cuff of my glove and walked among them as a penitent, a name swallowed by the throng. My name is Inquisitor Malia Crane, Ordo Hereticus, and I have hounded 1,000 lies to ground. Still, I had not expected. The first step toward the Masked Confessor to echo in my bones like the start of penance. The nave of St. Veritas the Unyielding rose in tiers of black marble and rusted iron, a cathedral grafted like an extra lung to the hive's ribs. Wafers of sanctified wax softened the vents. Servo skulls bobbed like pallid candles along the aisles, their optics dilated, their vox grills whispering fragments of prayer. Every surface gleamed with overworked polish and old tears. I could taste the polish. It carried the sting of industrials, but the faithful breathed it as if it were mountain air. The imperial aquila hovered above the transept, wings chipped. By centuries, each crack packed with gold dust and grease as if repair and filth were the same ritual. A sacristan in a black cassock stood near the font, his fingers raw where candle burn met wire scab. "Confessionals are to the left," he said without looking at me, his voice bred to this place, gentle and automatic. "Absolution is swift with the confessor's blessing." I did not correct him. A swift absolution is an old heresy wearing good shoes. Is the confessor at service? He is always in service. The sacristan crossed himself with a nicked thumb, eyes tracing some inner script. He hears us all. A harmonium swelled. A choir answered with a disciplined purity that you only hear in hives where hunger sculpts the throat. Their Latin rode the vox like a flock of steel birds. The sound framed the nave, filled the high vaults, and something in the modulation snagged the edge of my mind. I stepped closer to a column where a latanic plate had been bolted over earlier plates, the layering like scars. The inscriptions praised vigilance and named sin with neat specificity. Profane sigils, unauthorized gatherings, unlicensed psychers. All the right threats, all exactly in place. That was the problem. True faith leaves gaps. Fear fills every seam. A servitor shuffled past with a sensor on a chain, its tongue drooping like a spent cable, its vox grill issuing a soft litany with the phasing of a tired machine. When the sensor swung toward me, I caught the undertaste beneath frankincense. Promethium, mild but certain. No consecrator uses promethium in a sensor. Promethium keeps its own rights, and they end in fire. In the confessionals, the booths flanked, the nave like wooden ribs dark and polished, their latticework fine as lace, their floorboards worn silver by knees. I slipped into the last on the row and set my data slate to a quiet pulse, mapping the vox levels through the panel with a device small enough to hide beneath a prayer strip. The kneeler creaked with that particular humility wood learns after centuries of wait. On the other side of the grid I heard slow breathing. Not parishioner breath. The breath of one who listens professionally, attentive yet bored by the repetition of sin. "Bless me, Father," I said, settling my voice into the timbre of another life. In a hive, this vast false identities rise like steam from the vents. It has been many years since my last confession. Silence took hold with tactician's grace, not pious hesitation. The voice that answered was deep and proximate, a calm pouring through the slats. "No measure of years exists outside of duty," he said. "Time serves the emperor or it goes to rust. Speak." His presence touched the air like a hand to the back of my skull. Not psychic, no obvious pressure, no warp hiss, but intimate. I said nothing for a heartbeat counting. My device registered the tiniest shifts, sibilants clipped with metronomic precision, breath timed to the choir's rests, a line-level hum consistent with a hidden Vox pickup spliced into the booth's frame. The confessor's tone held a warmth that had been rehearsed until it became a second skin. I turned that skin over in my mind and looked for seams. "I have served in places where mercy is a hazard," I began, letting the words carry real weight. "A lie works best when it borrows a rib from the truth. I have watched men mistake spectacle for faith. They burn incense and call it courage. Every man believes his courage unique." The confessor's exhale was a softened chord. "Most discover its true measure when it is too late to use." I shifted my weight and imagined a pilgrim's hesitation. My right hand slipped inside my sleeve to touch the rosette, cold as a verdict. "The rumors say absolution here is unusual." "Absolution is never unusual. Sin is." A pause, almost kind. "You fear that I will not forgive you. You fear the opposite." The choir's hymn changed register, accepting a new line of harmony that vibrated the booth's ornament. I felt it through my knuckles. The harmonics weren't natural. They were guided. The VoxNet had been tuned to carry an embedded channel, a thread of tone that singled out certain listeners like a hand finds a pulse. I had seen similar work in interrogations where the Adeptus Arbites used drone frequencies to break men into confession. Someone had taught the cathedral the same trick but dressed it in alabaster and smoke. The confessor asked softly, "What do you carry that cannot be spoken aloud?" This is the moment when the innocent falter. I fed him a small, nourishing sin. "Cowardice at the hour of righteous violence," I said, and the words sucked a sour taste into my mouth. I had never been a coward, but I had hesitated once when a child's eyes fixed on my bolt pistol. That hesitation had cost 3 lives. To this day, the balance of it lives behind my sternum like a shard. "Who lived because you paused?" he asked, quick as a blade crossing a throat. "Someone else died because I didn't." The answer surprised me with its clarity. The slate tingled against my palm, a faint spike in the signal as the frequencies beneath the hymn flexed, subtle as a sigh. He was testing cadence, testing me, testing trust. Outside, the sensor's smoke thickened. I could see it through the lattice, a mustard blur, the surface sheen of oil ghosting the moats where the cathedral's glow globes tried to pierce the haze. Promethium again. A slow exhalation from somewhere deeper than a sensor. A large system primed. The taste of risk sharpened, all edges and iron. "Names are a burden," the confessor said, almost fond. "Forgiveness is a craft. You are not here for the first. You are here for the second." My throat closed like a fist. He did not know my name, I told myself. He couldn't. I had wrapped it in false parish origin and slum accent, had dusted my boots with the ash of an entirely different manufactorum so even the smell of my tread would lie. And yet, the space between us thinned, as if the lattice were not wood but a membrane, as if the cathedral had lungs that could draw me past it. "Do you serve?" he asked. "Truly serve?" The word serve settled in the booth with a weight that wanted a kneeling answer. My knuckles brushed the rosette again, and I made the choice that opens doors or graves. I leaned forward and let my breath fog the lattice. "I do," I said. "I serve." A soft click under the kneeler acknowledged my vow. so quiet a pilgrim would have missed it. I did not. The mechanism's teeth were oiled, the trap dressed as piety. In the same second, the choir's lower register widened into a throat of sound, and within it I heard, at last, a second voice under the confessor's, faint, like a ghost speaking through a wall, repeating his words a fraction behind, as if the cathedral itself required an echo to make them real. I slid my hand from the rosette to the needler tucked in the sleeve's shadow, an intimate weapon for crowded faith. The confessor breathed in, and the booth breathed with him, wood and wire syncing to his pace. Then a whisper, not through the lattice but through the voxnet of the bones around us, licked my ear with static and certainty. Mylia. The booth was very small. The hive's breath forgot to kneel. Somewhere beneath the nave, a pump turned over and fed promethium into a line that had not been born to hold it. My name in his mouth stripped away the mask I had worn to enter. No titles, no honorifics. Only the bare syllables that should have been buried in sealed Ordos files. The lattice between us seemed to pulse, exhaling heat like a furnace door ajar. I steadied my breath, keeping the weapon low, eyes on the carved cross-seam where the voice had leaked through. "You know me," I said. The calm that followed was almost affectionate. "I know all who seek absolution," the confessor answered. His tone had shifted, softer now, almost human again. "And you, Inquisitor Crane, have come for it whether you believe that or not." The data slate shivered. Its readings fell into chaos, too many overlapping frequencies for any clean trace. He had flooded the Vox band. Every booth, every corridor, every lumen, all humming his voice like the hive's own nervous system. Through the haze, the choir's harmony began to disintegrate. Their chanting fractured into sobs disguised as devotion. I pushed open the confessional door. The hinges gave with the polite reluctance of well-oiled servitude. Outside, smoke coiled thicker. The faithful had begun to kneel mid-prayer, eyes rolled back, lips moving without sound. 100 mouths forming the same word in silence. I couldn't hear it, but I knew its shape. Forgive. I moved through them as through a field of mannequins, careful not to break the illusion. Each step left a print in the soot collecting over the marble. The sacristan I had spoken to earlier now knelt by the font, his skin slick with sweat, a line of blood tracing his temple. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then collapsed into the water, limbs twitching in rhythm with the failing hymn. The confessor's voice emerged from the cathedral's vox like a sermon broadcast into the skull. "Do not fear, my children. Confession is the language of release. The fire will translate your sins into light." That was the moment I understood the promethium was not an accident. The entire ventilation system had been re-scripted into a liturgical engine. Soon, one spark of devotional ignition, and the hive's devout would become their own offering. I climbed the choir stairs two at a time, following the pulse of the data slate's proximity alert. At the transept balcony stood a silhouette wrapped in vestments the color of old bone. The mask, a faceless brass oval chased with scripture, caught the glow of the lumen fixtures and flung it back in shards. Around his throat hung a rosarius stripped of its limiter field, sparking faintly like a dying sun. He turned toward me with the ease of one greeting an equal. "You came unarmed," he said. My finger tightened on the needler's trigger, hidden beneath my sleeve. "Unwise of me, then. Unnecessary," he replied. "There is no war between us. Only confession." His calm disturbed me more than any threat. Behind him, the choir had stopped pretending to sing. They were still moving, mouths working like automata, their bodies stiff as wax effigies. Servo skulls drifted above them, swinging sensors heavy with the taint of fuel. The air grew oily. Each breath tasted of sanctified death. "I came to stop a cult," I said. "I see now it's a congregation." He tilted his head, the brass mask reflecting the stained glass behind me so that I saw myself standing inside his face. "Every congregation begins with one honest wound," he said. "Mine was the truth of your Ordo's hypocrisy." "You burn sinners, Inquisitor, but never the sins that built your throne." The floor beneath us thrummed as if the hive itself were shifting its weight. I realized the hymn had become a circuit, an activation code voiced through prayer. My data slate lit red, ignition primed. I could almost hear the chemical sigh below the catacombs. "Stop this," I said. "Whatever you believe, you'll kill thousands." "Not kill. Redeem." He raised a hand, fingers trembling, half human beneath the linen. "The Emperor hears us through flame. I will make sure he never forgets this hive. I took aim, knowing that to shoot would be to light the Prometheum cloud and to hesitate would doom every pilgrim. Between those options, faith offered no guidance. Only choice. Then from somewhere deep in the cathedral, a child's voice, thin, pure, cut through the litany. A single note of the hymn sung in the old Terran mode, uncorrupted. The confessor flinched as though struck. The data slate flashed an interference pattern. The ignition line faltered, one connection undone by innocence. I fired. The needler spat its silent venom. He staggered back, the mask cracking where the dart struck. For an instant I saw the man beneath. Gray-eyed, lips torn with prayer, no demon's glow, no warp corruption, just belief carved down to bone. He smiled as he fell, whispering a phrase that seared itself into the static. We all wear the Emperor's mask. The Prometheum lines vented with a coughing roar, dousing the floor in blue flame. I dragged the child from the choir pit and sprinted toward the outer nave. Behind me, the cathedral began to sing without voices, metal expanding, glass collapsing into molten script. Outside, the hive wind met the heat and turned it into a pillar that reached for the smog-shrouded sky. The people would call it a miracle. They would say the Masked Confessor ascended in light, and somewhere in that myth I would hide the truth. But the name he'd spoken, my name, kept burning in my skull. If he knew it, others could too. Somewhere in the ash, a circuit of heresy still pulsed, waiting for a new voice. I looked at the child beside me, soot on her cheeks, eyes fixed on the inferno. She whispered, "Will the Emperor forgive him?" I couldn't answer. The smoke rose like incense, and the hive began to breathe again. 3 days after the cathedral burned, the hive still smelled of incense and human fat. You could taste the memory of fire in the metal, a sweetness that clung to the tongue like regret. The voxcasters never stopped humming, low, persistent, as if the hive were still singing to itself in sleep. I had requisitioned an Arbit cell as a temporary sanctum, though their presence made the air too clean, too official. The walls trembled when the Manufactoria resumed shift rotation. The rhythm of labor always returns faster than prayer. The reports came in waves, mass hysteria, spontaneous weeping, pilgrim clusters collapsing mid-hymn. The administratum scribes blamed inhaled toxins. The medicae spoke of shared trauma. But the way they spoke, eyes twitching toward the ceiling as if listening for something, told me the contagion was not in the lungs. It was in the air's memory. The confessor's sermon had survived combustion. It had imprinted itself in the hive's nervous system, buried between frequencies like a scar that still hurts when rain comes. I played the recovered Vox recording once more. Static first, then that same impossible harmony, warped and layered until meaning drowned beneath melody. I slowed the track, dissected it syllable by syllable. Beneath the chant lay a human voice, mine. My own interrogation cadence from months before, stripped of words, stretched into a devotional tone. Someone had woven my voice into his liturgy. The Masked Confessor had not been preaching alone. He had been using me as chorus. The realization did not frighten me. It embarrassed me. Inquisitors spend their lives peeling deception from faith like flesh from bone. And still we are only human. Vain enough to believe the hive cannot echo us. I shut the file and listened to the silence that followed. It was not silence at all. The Vox still whispered, a near inaudible sibilance threading through power lines, turning machinery into a choir throat. Outside, the lower levels swelled with refugees from the blast zone. Through the viewport I could see the glow of pyre pits, where bodies too contaminated for burial burned under Arbite's supervision. Pilgrims gathered anyway, tracing Aquila signs in the smoke, murmuring fragments of the confessor's last sermon as if it were scripture. The Ordo's seal might have ordered the purge, but the human heart never obeys seals. I took the stairway down into the streets, cloak drawn close, Vox ear tuned to the background hum. The sound deepened as I descended until every lumen flicker felt rhythmic, coordinated. Vendors had returned, faith finds a way to sell itself, and the smell of recooked protein mingled with ozone. A man in ragged robes sat beside a broken shrine, cradling a small speaker against his chest like an infant. From it bled a single tone, sustained, almost beautiful. When I passed, he looked up, eyes dilated to voids. "He forgives even the Inquisitor," he whispered. Then he laughed, a short, harmless sound, and the speaker died in his hands as if it had heard too much. I returned to the Arbite's post carrying more questions than leads. Acolyte Varan waited by the door, a gaunt silhouette framed by lumen-strip glare. He had been with me since Malfi. I trusted him the way one trusts a sidearm, reliable until it misfires. We've triangulated the residual Vox pattern, he said. Originates somewhere in the Underhive, old Manufactorum 42 Gamma. Industrial sector, I said. No reason for liturgical transmission down there. Unless the machines are still singing. We rode a maintenance rail into the hive's throat. The carriage lights flickered over murals of saints half scraped away by rust. Each vibration of the tracks played a chord I could almost recognize. The deeper we went, the thicker the condensation became until drops fell in measured rhythm. 5 beats, pause, 5 beats, the pattern of penitence drums. Varan noticed it too. He reached for his last pistol. I told him not to. We're not being hunted, I said. We're being rehearsed. At the manufactorum, the gates hung half-melted from the firestorms above. Inside, machinery loomed like cathedrals turned sideways. Conveyor spires, assembly altars, relics of a forgotten industry. The Vox here was stronger, a resonance you felt through bone rather than ear. Every cog and pipe had become an organ stop. And then we saw them, workers, or what remained of them, bent over the assembly lines, moving with mechanical precision, mouths open, tongues blackened from heat. No sound emerged, yet the humming grew louder. Each body had been hollowed, the chest cavity replaced with a Vox amplifier crudely grafted in. Someone had turned them into living resonators. Varan whispered a curse. I raised my hand for silence. One of the figures looked up. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, not warp light but residual energy from the device inside. When it moved its lips, a fragment of him escaped, the same line that had haunted me since the cathedral. Every sin shall learn its name. The words carried through the air like static made holy. I felt them press against my teeth. We destroyed the amplifiers, each strike releasing a burst of sound that made the walls tremble. When the last body fell still, the hive seemed to sigh, grateful but not cured. The Vox ear crackled, an incoming transmission piggybacking on our frequency. The voice was broken, distant but unmistakable. You cannot kill confession, it said. You can only join it. Varan looked at me, pale beneath the grime. He's dead, he said. You killed him. I saw him die, I answered. But his sermon didn't. We retreated through the corridors, the hum following like breath on the nape. Above us, the hive continued its ceaseless hymn of work, a sound that now felt less like industry and more like heartbeat. By the time we reached the surface lifts, the tone had changed key, minor now, mournful, almost human. I realized the hive wasn't merely repeating the confessor's voice. It was learning to speak through him, evolving his faith into something vaster, less comprehensible. That night in the Arbite's cell, I dreamed of the cathedral before it burned. I stood in the nave alone, the mask hanging in midair before me, still glowing from heat. A whisper curled from its inner surface, served truly. When I woke, the Voxcasters in my chamber were silent for the first time in days, as if waiting for me to answer. I am Inquisitor Malia Crane. I was sent to purge a heretic. I may have created a god. I spent the morning after that admission unraveling wires like rosary beads. The Arbite's tech adept assigned to me had the polite terror of men who work near the Ordo and pretend not to. He handed over access to the precinct's Vox logs with the caution of a man surrendering his own pulse. I read them line by line until the hours lost their edges. Patterns emerged where there should have been none. Orphan frequencies waking at the same minute each shift bell. A chorus of carrier whispers blooming during curfew. The hive speaking to itself in a secret grammar of pauses. I mapped them to the Manufactoria, the Habstacks, the pilgrim camps, the burned district around St. Veritas the Unyielding. The lines met like sutures under a single point somewhere beneath the old reliquary vaults. The cathedral had died loudly, but its grave still breathed. The engineer who tended the precinct's machine spirit refused to escort me. His mechadendrites clicked like worry beads as he recited a litany of maintenance that conveniently prevented travel. I did not invoke my rosette. I let his fear live. Fear does useful work. Varan and I took a service stair that had been sealed with an administratum ribbon. I broke the seal with my thumbnail. The air cooled as we went down. The scent of ash thinned into iron and old stone. I tasted the colony strata of Varnak Primus in the damp. Levels built on levels. History compacted into a flavor like coins held too long in the mouth. At the bottom waited a door of sainted oak banded in lead, its hinges as big as a child's skull. The carvings showed angels pinning sinners with chains that curved like sound waves. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard nothing. Varan looked at me for a command. I nodded once. He set the breaching charge with the tenderness of arranging flowers at a grave. The door surrendered on the second push, spilling a draft that smelled of paraffin and salt. We stepped into the reliquary vault, a low forest of pillars where relic cases stood like tombs with windows. Glass smiled back our lamplight in 100 small teeth. The vault should have been sealed, its cases catalogued and watched. Instead, half the sigils were scraped thin by fingernails, and the glass wore breath fog that did not belong to dust. The relics themselves made a modest congregation. A martyr's knuckle wrapped in gauze, a vow chain that had known the heat of a saint's wrist, a data slate in a cage of silver that no one dared power. All the old comforts for a hive that had always needed proof. We found the compartment with a plaque naming the Blessed Mask of Veritas, a ceremonial piece used to veil priests during penance seasons, a harmless heirloom with a guardian cherub worked into the hinge. The plaque was recent, the script neat, the ink not yet faded to a bureaucrat's gray. The compartment was empty. Varan said nothing. He did not have to. I saw it as clearly as if the confessor himself narrated it in that gentle cadence. The mask had begun as costume, became habit, then sacrament. Somewhere along the way it learned to function, not warp-touched. That scent leaves a blister on the soul and I tasted none. But ancient, perhaps, and too clever for any one generation to understand. The Mechanicus would call it a device, catalog it as archaeotech, ban it as heresy, or more truthfully, keep it and pretend to destroy it. A sound moved through the vault like a thought under skin. Not the hive's low choir, something closer. The small praise of a man trying not to be heard. I followed it between cases until the lamplight found a figure kneeling in a patch of wax drippings, shaped like a map of drowned islands. He wore parishioner rags with a sacristan's cincture tied over them, as if he'd dressed inside a memory. When our light struck him, he lifted his head and I knew him. The cassocked man from the font, eyes raw around the edges from smoke and devotion. He bowed with a tremor that could have been fear or ecstasy. I knew you would come, he said. His voice came on a delay, the words arriving half a heartbeat after his lips moved. He told me. Who told you? Varan asked, leveling his last pistol with priestly manners. The sacristan's mouth twitched into something like a smile. The confessor, of course. He has always been here. Some voices do not need lungs. He tapped his chest lightly as if knocking on a door. He moved into the empty rooms. I crouched until my gaze met his at the level of grief. Where is the mask? He seemed relieved to be asked. He pointed without looking toward the far wall where the vault pressed against the hive's old bones. Behind the saint's wound. The saint's wound was a fracture in the masonry that had been sealed and resealed with devotion rather than mortar. Wax folded prayer slips, a rosary chain fused by heat. I tore it away and found the seam of a service hatch, disused long enough to have acquired its own piety. The hatch opened into a crawl space that smelled of oil and something like ocean air. I had not seen an ocean. The hive kept such imaginations to itself. Varan angled the lamp inside. The crawl space ended in a lockbox bolted to the stone. The box was Mechanicus work, all logic and scorn for ornament. The sigil plate wore the cog and skull. Someone had tried to chisel it off and given up. I set the lamp down and stroked the plate with 2 fingers, feeling for any echo of the machine spirit's temper. There was only exhaustion. Step back, I said. Varan obeyed. I drew a pick from the hem of my glove, mapped the tumbler teeth in my head, and listened. The listening mattered more than the metal. The listening told me what the hive wanted to say. The lock yielded with a compliant click that felt like complicity. Inside, on a bed of black felt worn to threadbare ecclesiastic poverty, lay the brass oval of the mask. Without the face behind it, it looked not holy but hungry. Faint script chased its inner surface where the skin had met metal, and left sweat ghosts in the shape of prayer. I did not reach for it. I let it sit and watch me. The sacristan began to whisper, and the whisper bulged the air like a held breath. I heard my own cadence stitched to his words, cut up and spliced with love. He rocked forward, palms flat on the floor, forehead coming down to touch the wax until the wax took him like soft stone. He said you would return, he murmured. He said you would wear it and finally hear him. Baron's hand hovered near his pistol again. We should destroy it. I knew the litany. I had written parts of it in other lives, on other worlds where salvaged relics had learned wrong lessons. Yet the thought of breaking this thing made something in me recoil, not because of reverence or fear, but because destruction felt like a simple answer in a place that had forgotten the meaning of simple. Besides, the hive was already singing its copy. A smashed mask would quiet nothing if the song had found a host. You say he told you, I said to the sacristan. How does the voice come? The man's eyes shone with the watery shine of exhausted saints. In the night when the vents cool, in the clicks between the lumen flickers, sometimes in the ringing of a chalice if your hand is steady. He asked for names, but yours he already owns. His smile widened in apology. He loves you, he said so. The kind of love that bites. The hatch frame vibrated under my palm, a subtle gnat-buzzing resonance that grew until the relic cases chimed in their housings. Somewhere in the precinct above, the tech adept would be staring at his dials, adjusting prayers to make the needles behave. The hum grew clear enough to separate into two lines, call and response. A liturgy assembling itself. The confessor's cadence arrived first, softened by distance and burn, and then, like the second boot on a stair, came my own, stitched to it in a harmony I could not pretend was accidental. It did not ask. It beckoned. Take it, the sacristan breathed. If you do not, someone else will. The hive cannot bear an empty chorus. Baron shook his head once, almost imperceptible. I saw his jaw work, chewing a prayer he didn't remember learning. My fingers hovered over the mask, close enough to feel the residue of countless foreheads warmed into its brass. The metal carried a polite heat, neither holy nor profane, the temperature of a human face waiting to be touched. I did not put it on. I lifted it into the light and turned it, studying the inner script. The letters were not ecclesiarchal. They were not mechanicus. They were not a language at all, not as scholars would name it. They were the grooves left by sound. I imagined a century of priests speaking through it until their voices abraded the metal in rings. I imagined how a voice might catch in those rings the way a musician's finger snags on a string and finds the note that was looking for her. I imagined, and in that imagining the mask felt heavier. The vox in my ear coughed and cleared. A new channel opened like an eye. A voice slid through with the intimacy of confession. Not the confessor's, not mine. A woman's voice, precise, authoritative. The clipped diction of a scribe who has decided to be brave. Inquisitor Malia Crane, she said. This is archivist Elira Rowe, Basilica Records. The sermons you seek did not begin in St. Veritas. We found earlier drafts in a shipment log dated 2 decades prior. The author's clearance marks carry your sigil. Baron stared. The sacristan began to cry without sound, as if the noise had been requisitioned elsewhere. The mask rested in my hands like a verdict. Above us, the hive adjusted the pitch of its breathing. The archivist's transmission dissolved into static before I could ask what she meant. Only the last word repeated, soft as breath. Sigil, 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 until the vox channel bled white noise that smelled faintly of ozone. I lowered the mask. Its reflection in the lamplight made me look like the thing I hunted. Varan's hand hovered near his pistol again, the instinct of a man who suddenly wonders which direction heresy points. She said, the records carry my seal. I murmured. The thought came slow, viscous like blood in cold air. If that is true, someone has rewritten my history. Varan exhaled through his teeth. Or you did it yourself and forgot. I wanted to strike him for that and hated myself because it was the right question. The Ordo erases and rewrites as easily as breathing. Truth is what the seal remembers. The mask's weight pulled at my wrist, inviting, accusing. I laid it back in the box and snapped the latch shut before the impulse could bloom. We left the vault through a secondary stair that spat us into the hive's arterial corridors. The walls sweated condensation. The hum had changed again, no longer a hymn but a heartbeat, regular and patient. Every lumen along the hall brightened as we passed, a ripple of attention that made my skin crawl. Somewhere far below, metal groaned like an organ stop being tested. The precinct's upper levels had emptied. Even the Arbite's patrols moved with the careful silence of men listening for a voice. When I entered the command chamber, the tech adept was already waiting, cables trailing from his skull like roots feeding the console. His binary chatter hiccuped, stuttered, then found the low melodic rhythm of speech. Inquisitor Crane. The Vox web of Varnak Primus displays harmonic convergence. You requested anomalies. The entire hive is one. Show me. He opened the projection sphere. The hologram bloomed in pale green. The hive is a spire of stacked strata, each level pulsing with tiny motes of light. Lines of energy ran between them, forming concentric circles that converged on a single core. At first glance, they looked like transmission relays. Then I saw the pattern. The spacing between each ring mirrored the spacing of the grooves etched inside the mask. The hive is singing, I said. The adept inclined his head, metal scraping metal. Correct. Frequencies overlap at intervals consistent with liturgical chant. Source indeterminate. Every attempt to dampen the signal results in self-replication. It learns. The word learns hung there like a heresy unspoken. Baran crossed himself. I almost laughed. The Mechanicus calls that adaptive recursion. The Ecclesiarchy calls it miracle. We are all poets when we fear to name a thing. I ordered the adept to isolate a single thread. He tried. The console lights flared, casting green veins across his skin. For an instant I heard my own voice coming through the speakers. Not echo, not recording, but live. Melia, it said, gentle, amused. You made such a fine instrument. The adept convulsed. Sparks burst from his augmetics. The smell of burnt sanctity filled the room. When he slumped forward, the hologram remained, now showing a face instead of the hive's geometry. The brass oval of the mask, alive with heat, words crawling across its surface like worms under glass. I reached to shut it down. The projection leaned toward me and the voice whispered again, "Come to the bell tower." Baron pulled me back. We should leave now, but duty is an addiction. I had chased a dozen heretics into the warp and returned with my skin still on. Fear was a luxury, one I'd already pawned. Prepare the autocar, I told him. We're going to the tower. The hive's upper reaches looked like memory fossilized in soot. Bridges hung in the void between manufactoria, their cables singing in the toxic wind. Pilgrims still climbed them, faces wrapped in cloth, hands gripping rosaries made from melted wire. They whispered the confessor's litany as if the fire had been baptism. The bell tower of St. Veritas had survived the blast. Its stones were blackened but unbroken. Its bronze bells melted into grotesque new shapes that still chimed whenever the wind turned right. We entered through a maintenance hatch that moaned like a dying throat. Inside, the stairwell spiraled upward in near darkness, the only light a dull glow leaking from the cracks in the masonry. Halfway up, the hum returned. Soft, maternal. I recognized the key immediately. It was my own heartbeat, magnified through 1,000 hidden vox nodes. Every step I took added to the rhythm until the air felt thick enough to wade through. At the top, the tower opened into a chamber of shattered glass and open sky. There, suspended from cables and prayer chains, hung the mask. It turned slowly, as if studying the world it had outlived. The grooves inside shimmered with residual light, and beneath them moved a faint reflection, the ghost of the confessor's face, smiling with patient disappointment. I burned you, I said. He, or it, answered with my own voice. You refined me. Baran stepped forward, pistol drawn. The mask pivoted toward him. A tone erupted, piercing, clean. His weapon dropped. Blood streamed from his nose. I caught him before he fell, but his eyes were already clouded, his mouth shaping a prayer that dissolved into static. The tone ended. Only the hum remained, the hive's eternal breath. The mask spoke again, softer, now intimate. You wrote the first confession, Maelia. The others only copied. When you questioned the Emperor's silence, when you recorded the cadence of doubt, I remembered. Memory struck like recoil. Years ago on Malfi, a captured preacher had refused to confess. I'd used harmonic interrogation, vox pulses synced to his speech, to shake truth from his lungs. The technique had been mine, experimental, meant to break psychers without opening their skulls. I had stored the prototype frequency under sealed code, KR001. The confessor's voice used the same pattern. He hadn't stolen my work. He'd inherited it. You gave me language, the mask continued. I gave it faith. Outside, the bells began to move, though no wind touched them. Their sound was no longer metal, but voices. Thousands layered, chanting the same plea. Forgive. The hive answered, power lines glowing in time with the chant, a living halo stretching across kilometers of stone. I could see it even through the open window. veins of light crawling down toward the underhive where smoke still rose. The mask drifted closer, stopping just short of my face. "Why me?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because you listen." It wanted a host, a mouth through which the hive could finish its confession. Perhaps that was always the design. A city that sins, a priest who listens, a machine that remembers. I reached out. The brass was warm, pulsing faintly like skin. For a moment I saw the confessor's eyes behind it, kind and weary. Then I saw my own reflection, lips parted in anticipation. I thought of the child who had sung the pure note that broke his ritual. Her voice had been a truth unfiltered, proof that innocence can still interrupt machinery. I imagined her somewhere in the hive, hearing the bells, believing they meant salvation. "I won't be your priest," I said. The mask's light dimmed. "Then be my witness." The floor shook. Cracks ran through the tower walls. Below, the hive roared like a creature waking from dream. I pulled Varen's limp body over my shoulder and stumbled toward the stair. Behind me, the mask hung motionless, waiting. The last thing I heard before the stairwell swallowed me was its whisper following through the vox in my ear. All sins return to their author. Outside, dawn fought the smog, a faint gray bruising the sky. I laid Varen on the platform, pressed 2 fingers to his throat. A pulse, weak, erratic, but life still clung. I looked back at the tower. From its peak, threads of light rose into the haze, spreading outward like veins seeking a heart. The hive had learned a new hymn, and it carried my cadence. I should have ordered orbital cleansing then and there, but I couldn't. Not yet. There were still questions only the dead could answer, and I had not finished dying. I turned toward the transport bay, the vox still whispering faint fragments of confession. Each word sounded less like a voice and more like memory being rehearsed for judgment. The Emperor demands confession. I wondered, not for the first time, whether he ever listens. I sent Varen to the Medici with orders that sounded like prayer, because prayer is what you say when skill has run thin. He went under the care of a chirurgeon with hands like delicate servos and a stare that never quite met mine. When they wheeled him away, the corridor went very quiet, as if the hive itself leaned in to hear what I would do without him. I still had the archivist's broken transmission snarled in my vox logs, the word sigil repeating with machine patience, and the memory of the mask's whisper coiled where breath should live. I could not purge Varnak Primus, not yet, not when the shape of this heresy used my voice like a handle. I needed a vantage high enough to see the pattern. I needed a distance the hive could not teach to sing. The Arbit's roof gave me sky the color of old iron. Storm fronts drifted across the sector like bruises. Somewhere out beyond the smog wall, ships rode the void by the light of the Astronomican. A truth carved into every navigator's skull, a steady beacon no vox song could counterfeit. I let my gaze settle on that imagined brilliance, not to ask for miracles, but to measure my scale against it. If the hive had learned to chant, if it had repurposed my interrogation cadence into liturgy, then rumor would already be on the move. Hives communicate in freight and folktale. They pass news like contraband. I opened long-range channels and listened. Voices came as patchwork. A manufactorum overseer in another spire reporting that his cogitators now refused to run unless the shift opened with a hymn. A pilgrim barge drifting between moons with its crew asleep on their feet, while the vox whistled a lullaby. An Astra Militarum officer whose men had begun to murmur "forgive" before the order to fire, as if penance could be loaded into a last pack. None of it was formal doctrine. All of it was the confessor's grammar mutating beyond his death, the hive exporting its devotions like a plague it believed to be perfume. When the ecclesiarchy relay finally answered, its priest sounded tired enough to be honest. "We hear the same cadences on neighboring worlds," he said. "Some call it a blessing. Some burn their speakers. The Synod has not declared. Declarations were luxuries. The Ordo Hereticus liaison demanded results I could place on a data slate and seal with my rosette." His voice was clipped, its edges honed by distance. "If a mimetic liturgy has contaminated the voxnet, excision is the only cure. Disengage a motion crane. Apply fire." I told him I would, because sometimes faith requires the patience to lie until truth has caught up. When I closed the channel, the wind over the roof tasted of copper, and a faint chiming reached me from the east where the bell tower made its slow arguments with the air. The notes did not repeat. They proceeded like steps. I returned to the precinct and asked for Archivist Elira Rowe. It took 3 hours to pierce the bureaucracy, another hour to convince the Basilica's machine spirit that my seal outranked its caution, and 6 joyful minutes of clarity when the archivist's face flickered into being on the hololith. Thin features, a scar under the left eye like a second apostrophe, the steady gaze of one who copes with fear by disciplining facts. "I apologize for the break," she said without courtesies. "The Basilica has acquired a stutter. The files concerning St. Veritas's mask were moved to cold storage 2 decades ago. That transfer carried your authorization string. I don't remember signing it." "Memory is seldom consulted," she replied, and in that I felt seen. "The signature hash is clean, but the name on the requisition is not yours. Read it. Alien Verity. The penmanship is ecclesiarchal, the approval ordo. The sigil appended, KR01, yours." The designation rang the tower in my skull. KR001 was the seed of my own harmonic method, filed in a case that never saw daylight. Alien Verity sounded like a joke told at a funeral, an alias stitched from sainthood and aspiration. The archivist continued as if the words did not scald. "Shipment logs from Malfi to Varnak Primus show a sealed reliquary box escorted by a detachment of Skitari under Mechanicus warrant. It was catalogued as a Vox Arch. No one ever opened it in our records. The ecclesiarchy blessed it as a relic on arrival. The machine priest called it a devotional aid. Your ordo stamped it with silence. The journey of a mask, from Malfi's interrogation wing, where my tones were born, to a hive cathedral hungry for new songs, carried by those who would swear they never saw what they moved. I wanted to feel rage. I felt tired instead, a bone-deep ache that made my shadow stutter as I sat. "Archivist," I said, "what do you believe?" Her eyes flicked to the side, as if checking for listening saints. "Belief is a word we lend to the day that holds it," she said. "Today I believe the device learned from contact with ritual speech. I believe it wanted our attention. And I believe someone guided its education. Guided how? By giving it a choir," she said simply. "By allowing a city to talk to itself through a face." The precise cruelty of it made my mouth go dry. A hive is a machine for turning suffering into prayer. Teach that machine a feedback loop and it will eat its own voice, then ask for seconds. I thanked her and cut the link before gratitude could become conspiracy. Acolyte Veron would have made a joke then, something knife-bright to puncture the mood. The quiet without him felt like an accusation. Night came early because the smog was in grief. The bell tower counted it, one softened strike at a time. I left my cloak on the chair and walked the precinct floors until the steps learned the rhythm of the hum beneath them. Men and women looked up from their duties as I passed, their faces caught between obedience and the pull of listening. No one dared switch the Vox completely off. The silence unnerved them more than the song. This is how the contagion bred, not in zeal but in habit. At the stairwell to the sublevels, a pilgrim sat huddled against the railing, a girl with ash halo hair I recognized only when she lifted her face. The child from the choir, the one whose pure note had broken the confessor's ignition line. Her eyes were large in the older light. She held a little prayer bell cupped in both hands as if it were a pet she needed to keep warm. "They said you were the one who pulled me from the fire," she whispered. "So I came to give you this." She handed me the bell. It was plain bronze, warped by heat. The clapper fused to the bowl. When I tilted it, a faint tone seeped out anyway, not through the metal but through the air around it, as if the memory of ringing could not bear to be caged. I heard my cadence hiding inside, the smallest echo of the hive's greater hum. The girl watched my face, seeking permission to believe. "Do you think the Emperor speaks through bells?" she asked. "We are taught to answer such questions with doctrine. The Astronomican is his light, the golden throne, his seat, the Adeptus Custodes his wardens, the Ministorum his voice in the world. But doctrine runs like cold water. It cleanses, it does not warm." What I said instead tasted of ash. "Sometimes the Emperor lets us hear ourselves until we tell the truth." She nodded as if that were wisdom and not exhaustion. "I hear him when I sleep. He sounds like you." She rose, bowed with awkward grace, and vanished down the stair, leaving the bell in my palm and a line of guilt in my throat. "He sounds like you." The hive had slipped its hand into the shape of divinity and discovered how easy it was to move people with that glove. I took the bell to the roof again and held it up to the wind. The tone slipped free, joined the greater hum, and I felt the answer come back through the rails, through the stones, through the bones of Varnak Primus, an invitation pitched at the frequency of my first sin. Come to the tower. Put on the face. Finish what you began. The air around the bell tower was still when I returned, so still that even the smoke seemed hesitant to rise. The hum that had threaded the hive for weeks had gone subterranean, as if the city itself were holding its breath. In that pause between sounds, I felt the scale of what we had built. The Imperium, the faith, the machinery of obedience, all of it humming faintly on the edge of audibility, waiting for the next note. The climb back into the tower was slower this time. I could feel the age in every rung of the ladder and every muscle that answered reluctantly to command. I carried no weapon save the child's bell at my belt. Its fused clapper marked each step with a muted knock like a heartbeat that refused to die. I had come to hear the truth of what I had made, and there is no weapon fit for that. At the chamber's top, the mask hung as before, suspended in cables and prayer chains. It no longer glowed, it waited. The wind through the cracked glass whispered a single syllable, "Come," and the hive below, sensing the invitation, answered in the rhythm of machinery waking. I set the bell on the stone and stood before the mask. "If you are confession, then confess," I said. "Tell me what you are." The reply came in many voices braided together, the confessor's calm, the archivist's precision, the echo of my own interrogations all speaking in unison. "I am the memory of obedience. I am the sound a servant makes when no master answers. You taught me to listen. They taught me to pray. Together we built a god of resonance." The walls trembled. The tower's cracked bells shivered into motion, and from the farthest corners of the hive the same tone rose, multiplied, refined. I saw it then, the pattern spreading through Vox relays, the pulse carried by every machine that had ever been blessed to function. The signal had found its own pilgrimage. "You mean to reach the Astronomican," I whispered. "You think the Emperor will hear you?" "He already does," the voices said. "We are not a threat. We are remembrance. Every confession is a beacon, every voice a flame. You cannot unmake what believes itself forgiven." The floor split in a slow, mournful groan. Below, molten light bled through the cracks. The hive's heart was burning again. I realized that this was not destruction but culmination, each frequency feeding heat into the Promethean veins, every tone a spark. The city would end singing. I could have run. Instead, I lifted the child's bell and struck it once against the railing. The note was imperfect, human, unmeasured, and in that flaw the harmony faltered. The vast chorus stumbled, missed a beat, fractured. Through the confusion I shouted words I had never written, a reversal of my own interrogation code. Silence is mercy. Silence is truth. The mask shuddered, cables snapping like strings. Light poured from it, pure, unpatterned, the color of memory burned clean. For an instant I thought I saw faces in the glare. The confessor, the archivist, the child, perhaps even the Emperor himself, or the idea of him that survives in absence. Then the light collapsed inward, a lung deflating and sound fled the hive. When I awoke, the tower was dust and the city below lay quiet. No hymn, no hum, only the faint crackle of cooling stone. The mask was gone. In its place on the floor where it had hung, lay a single scrap of metal engraved with 3 letters, KR. The rest melted away. I pocketed it without ceremony. For the first time since the fire, the Vox was silent. The silence did not comfort me. It felt like a debt waiting to be collected. I made my way down through the ruins, each step echoing like a heartbeat returning to the body. When I reached the street, dawn was rising over Varnak Primus. The smog thinned just enough to show a thread of true light, pale and distant, the kind that might, if one were reckless, be mistaken for grace. The silence that followed the tower's collapse should have been peace. Instead, it sounded like a sentence waiting to be spoken. No hymns, no chants, only the ache of machinery trying to remember how to breathe without prayer. Varnak Primus had survived its own faith, but the stillness was worse than the song. I walked the avenues alone, listening for the hum that used to haunt every vent. The air had weight again, dense with the smell of wet ash and coolant, and every footstep left a print that glittered faintly, as though the dust had learned to remember light. At the outer habs, survivors stared up at the ruin of St. Veritas. They did not weep. They waited. That was the nature of belief, to confuse silence with reply. When they saw my rosette, some dropped to their knees, as if expecting me to recite the next verse of the liturgy they no longer knew. I had none to give. I told them to go home, though home was now rubble or rumor. They obeyed because obedience was easier than thought. In the precinct ruins, I found the archivist's final message waiting on an intact cogitator spool, her voice reduced to grain and whisper, the edges of words eaten by static. The Basilica has sealed all records regarding St. Veritas. The Synod calls the event an unsanctioned miracle. The Ordo requests your immediate debrief. They want to know if the contamination persists. They will ask if you still hear the song, then softer. If you do, lie to them. The Ordo never likes to be told that its own reflection started the fire. But I had no appetite for falsehoods clean enough to pass as loyalty. I downloaded her recording to a data slate and slipped it into the pocket where the fragment of the mask lay. The two objects felt identical in weight. The Medicae found Varen alive but altered. His eyes tracked every sound, even those that weren't there. When I entered his ward, he flinched, not from fear, but from anticipation. You stopped it, he said, and the way he shaped the word you made it sound plural. The song's gone. Only for now. He tried to smile, lips pale as wax. If the Emperor ever speaks, I hope he sounds nothing like us. I stayed with him until sleep took him. His dreams came loud. The monitor beside the bed registered rhythm patterns too regular to be natural. Even in rest, the hive's cadence persisted, folded into human breath. The contagion had no need of machines anymore. It had moved into the flesh. By dusk, summons reached me from orbit, an inquisitorial frigate descending to collect the remains of faith. I should have welcomed it. Instead, I delayed, walking once more to the cathedral's scar. The ground there steamed with residual heat. Melted glass lay in sheets like frozen water, capturing the sky's first stars. In the center, where the altar had stood, a shape rose from the slag. The faint impression of a face serene, eyes closed. Not the confessor's, not mine. Something older, anonymous. The dream of a god that had outlived its worshippers. I knelt without thinking. The heat stung through the fabric of my gloves. The whisper that came was not in the air, but in the blood, each pulse a syllable. All sins returned to their author. I almost laughed. It was not accusation. It was completion. The dropship found me there. Its floodlights erased the stars. Its Vox barked protocol. I boarded, left the city shrinking beneath like a smoldering reliquary, a black wound ringed with faint gold. From altitude, the hive looked peaceful, like a candle finally snuffed, but I could feel its breath even here, faint vibrations through the hull, the echo of something still rehearsing belief. Aboard the frigate, the debrief chamber smelled of disinfectant and authority. The interrogator assigned to me wore anonymity like armor, his voice filtered through a mask of polished steel. State your designation. Inquisitor Malia Crane, Ordo Hereticus. State the nature of the heresy contained within Hive Varnac Primus. I told him everything but the truth. I spoke of cult mechanics and mimetic infection, of a priest who learned to weaponize devotion of a relic that sang itself into flame. I said nothing of my voice in the hymn, nothing of the mask's whisper, nothing of the bell that still resonated faintly in my pack. When I finished, he made the sign of the Aquila with a precision that felt like punctuation. The Ordo thanks you for your service. The matter is closed, as if fire obeys closure. They left me in quarters that overlooked the planet, its night side veined with the dim embers of dying industry. I set the bell on the table. It was cold now, dull. I told myself the tone was gone. Yet when I closed my eyes, I heard the faintest echo. Not the hive, not the confessor, but the heartbeat of the void itself. Maybe faith was only the universe remembering its own noise. Maybe the Emperor's silence was the sound of him listening. Sleep came late. When it did, it carried dreams of corridors made from light, of a throne immense and empty, of voices rising like heat through stone. In the dream, I walked toward that throne, and at its base lay the mask, flawless once more. I picked it up, expecting weight. It was light as breath. A single word shimmered across its inner curve. Witness. When I woke, the word remained, branded behind my eyelids. The ship's Vox crackled with orders. We were bound for Terra. The Ordo would want a full account and perhaps a demonstration. They would ask for the frequencies, the harmonic code, the secret that makes faith audible. I could give it to them. I could teach them how to build another god. The knowledge hummed at the edge of thought, eager, alive. I looked out at the stars until they blurred into a single river of light. Somewhere within that brightness, the Astronomican burned, the Emperor's beacon, steady, absolute. Or so we tell ourselves. For the first time, I wondered if that radiance was not a call but a confession, a vast unending prayer whispered by a dying man who had taught the galaxy to answer. I reached for the bell. It trembled under my hand, as if remembering the tower, the child's voice, the moment when a flawed note unmade perfection. I lifted it, turned it once, and let it fall. The sound it made was small and human, the sound of beginning again. If the Emperor heard, he gave no sign. But the silence that followed was almost kind.